Every once in a while, I go back through old things I've written or recorded, and I've been doing that for years. It's not really nostalgia, at least that's not usually the point. It's more like monitoring my growth through my work. I spend a lot of time talking about growth and change, and one of the advantages of having spent so much time putting my thoughts into microphones is that I've got a record. I don't have to rely entirely on my memory of who I used to be because I can actually go back and listen to him. And sometimes I agree with him, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I find something that makes me what the fuck I was thinking. This time was different. I went all the way back to the first episode of this podcast, and I remembered just about every word. There weren't any surprises. There wasn't anything that made me cringe. I wasn't sitting there wishing I could go back and correct myself. I still understood everything I said. I just didn't relate to it in quite the same way anymore. And that's interesting to me. Apparently, you can still agree with something you said, but recognize you're no longer the person who said it. That first episode was partly an introduction to this show. I talked about why I was naming it Call Me Tony, where I had been in podcasting, and why I wanted to do something that was a little less about sending a message and a little more about people or letting people know me. Then I told a story about how Facebook kept suggesting someone in the people you may know section. It was someone I definitely knew, just not anymore. She was someone that I had been deeply in love with when I was young. Not the first person I ever loved, but probably the biggest love of that part of my life. We hadn't been in the same room since 1994. When I recorded that first episode, seeing her picture still did something to me. I described it as an emotional pang. There was still a familiarity there. There was still fondness. There was still a part of me that wanted to reach out. And a friend had asked me why I didn't. Why not send the message? Why not make the call? What was stopping me? And my answer was reality. I was afraid of what reality might do to something that I had been carrying for such a long time. This wasn't somebody I dated for a while and occasionally wondered about. I carried this woman with me for more than 2 decades, through 2 marriages, through completely different versions of my life. For years, I would say her name out loud at least once a day. Just her name. There wasn't some ritual attached to it. I wasn't sitting in a dark room surrounded by candles looking at old photographs. I would just say her name, often just a whisper. And somehow that kept the connection alive. For a very long time, if you had offered me a legitimate chance to be with her again, I would have walked away from pretty much everything I had to take it. That's how much space she occupied in me. So when Facebook started putting her face in front of me again, whether to reach out or not wasn't a small decision. There was a lot attached to it. Ultimately, I decided not to do it. The reasoning I gave in that first episode still makes sense to me. We were young when we knew each other. We had 30 years of separate lives since then. And whatever connection had existed between those two people belonged to those two people. I wasn't him anymore. I had no idea who she was anymore. I said that if we sat down together, we would essentially be two strangers bringing the feelings of unrelated people to the table. And I still think that's a pretty good description. There would have been history, obviously, but history isn't necessarily a relationship. At the time, though, there was something else going on. I wanted to preserve the magic. I actually used that word, magic. I said I wanted to remember something innocent and wonderful. I wanted to remember her as the one who got away. I acknowledged that there was probably some dishonesty involved in that. I knew I was preserving a version of the story. There were reasons we'd broken up. It hadn't actually been perfect. Obviously, it hadn't been perfect because perfect relationships don't end. But I didn't care. I said I deserved a little bit of magic, and I still don't think I was wrong. That's probably the strangest part of listening to the episode now because I'm not looking back at that guy thinking he was naive. I'm not thinking that I know better than he did. Actually, I think he understood where he was at better than I possibly could now. He was living it, and I'm looking at it from years away. There's a temptation when we talk about personal growth to give our present selves some kind of authority over every previous version of us. Like we're standing at the top of a mountain looking down at all those idiots we used to be. I try to avoid doing that. I know things today that I didn't know then. But he knew things about being him that I've since forgotten. He knew what that loss felt like. He knew what was attached to her name. He knew what he needed to protect. And I'm not going to tell him he was wrong just because I don't need the same things anymore. That's what's changed. Not the story, not really my opinion of the story. The fondness changed. I don't know exactly when, because there wasn't an on-off switch. I didn't wake up one morning and realize that I was finally over her. There wasn't some dramatic moment where I deleted an old photograph and inspirational music started playing. I didn't even really notice it happening. It wasn't until I went back to that first episode that I realized I don't relate to the memory in the same way anymore. Today, I think of her more like a relic than a lost love. And I don't mean relic in a disrespectful way. I mean something that belongs to another time, something important, something worth preserving, something that doesn't belong in my present. The her that I loved, she's gone. Lost to time. Just like the version of me who loved her. And there's something peaceful about accepting that. She can be an important part of my history without being a threat to my present. And she was a threat to my present for a very long time. And not because she was doing anything. She wasn't. For most of those years, she probably had no idea what was going on in my head. The threat was what I was carrying. I was hung up on someone who wasn't there. So hung up that I carried her through 2 marriages. So hung up that I kept saying her name just to maintain some tiny connection. So hung up that if the right opportunity had presented itself, I might have blown up whatever life I had at the time just for the possibility of getting her back. That's not where I am anymore. The time we shared was special. I don't need to qualify that or reduce it just because it ended. I don't need to tell myself it wasn't real because it didn't last forever. Maybe some things are special partly because they belong where they happened. You know, I think of some of the movies, toys, and activities I loved when I was a kid. Things that were incredibly important to me. You can go back to some of those things as an adult, and sometimes it's fun. Sometimes you get that little hint of this nostalgia and you think, wow, I remember this. But you're not experiencing it the way you did then. You can't. You're not that kid anymore. The toy didn't change. The movie didn't change. The activity didn't change. You changed. There are movies I remember as absolutely incredible that I could probably watch today and spend the entire time wondering what the fuck I ever saw in them. That doesn't mean the joy I experienced as a kid wasn't real. It means it belonged to that kid. I don't need to rewatch everything to find out whether it still holds up. Some things can just belong where they belong, and I think that's where she is for me now. In that first episode, I said there's a piece of my heart that belongs to her and always will, and I still believe that. I don't think I get that piece back. I don't think I want it back. It was given. It became part of my history. And that doesn't mean I love her today in any meaningful sense, because I don't. I don't know her. What remains is evidence that someone once mattered to me enormously. There's a difference between letting go of someone and trying to erase what they meant to you. Erasing feels like denial to me, stuffing it away, pretending it didn't matter because admitting that it mattered is uncomfortable. Letting go is acceptance. It happened. It mattered. It's over. Those things can all be true at the same time. Do I know with absolute certainty that I've let her go? No. I don't know how anybody knows with that certainty. I'm also not particularly interested in taking the whole thing apart to find out. I don't spend that much time unpacking things unless there's an obvious reason to. And maybe someday something happens that makes me look at all this differently again. Time will tell. I don't need to decide today whether the fading fondness is something I've gained or something I've lost. I also don't need to spend much time asking whether I should have let her go sooner. Maybe my life would have been better if I've gotten over her 5 years earlier. Maybe it would have been worse. Who knows? The problem with looking backwards and imagining what I should have done differently is that I only get to imagine the part I want to change. I don't get to see everything that would have changed because of it. My past produced this version of me. The good decisions did. The bad decisions did. The stupid things did. The things I wish I had done differently, they did too. I can't pull one thread out and know what happens to everything else. So I don't need to turn this into regret. I don't regret loving her. I don't regret that she mattered. I don't even know whether I regret how long she mattered in the way she did. It happened. That's enough. What's interesting to me now is noticing that something changed. I went back to an old recording to check in with an old version of myself, and I found the guy saying things I still understand and mostly still agree with. I couldn't feel what he was feeling anymore, but I remembered it. That's different. Maybe that's one of the ways we change, because that doesn't get talked about very much. Sometimes growth isn't about changing your mind. Sometimes the words stay exactly the same. The facts stay the same. The memories stay the same. You just stop standing in that same relationship to them. Something that used to be right in front of you gradually moves into the background. Then one day, you turn around and realize how far away it is. If Facebook put her in my people you may know today, I know what I'd do. I'd look at her. I'd hope she's okay. I'd hope she's happy. More than anything, I'd hope she found the peace she struggled so hard to find back then. Then I would keep scrolling. Not angrily, not sadly, not because she doesn't matter, because she does. She just matters differently now. There was a time when saying her name kept something alive. Today, I don't need to. The relationship had its time. The love had its time. Even the longing had its time. Now it gets to be history. History doesn't disappear just because we stop trying to live in it.